Welcome to Promote, Profit, Publish. My name is Juliette Clark. I'm your host today, and we have one of our authors as a guest, and I think you'll be really interested in what she has to say. But before we get started, I want to remind you, go over and grab your free subscription of Breakthrough Author Magazine. We have lots of tips and tricks, and as of May, we're actually adding a couple new contributors who will be speaking more to content development, as well as the intersection. We've got the Femme Pod Girls who are going to be talking about the intersection of publishing, speaking, and content and media, which, I know a lot of you guys try to do this a piece at a time, but guess what? You have to figure out how to integrate it all in order for this platform to really work. So once again, www.breakthroughauthormagazine.com. And if you like to watch videos instead of listening on the podcast, go over to YouTube, Superbrand Publishing, subscribe to our channel, and you can see all of these people in person. Today's guest is Denise Schaad. Denise is a spiritual teacher, artist, self-awareness coach, thought leader, and awakens leaders by illuminating their truths so that they can embrace and align with their soul and spirit. Denise has a natural gift to see emotional energy and release it from the physical body. Her purpose is to guide and teach leaders to feel whole through releasing the emotional energies and embodying their spiritual frequency. Welcome, Denise.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I can see you have some of that art in the background there.
I do. I'm surrounded by
it. Good deal. So your new book is coming out. It's called Spirit Speaks. And it's really about getting rid of that ego and embracing yourself in a more fuller way. Let's get into what's going to be hard for people about this book. Yeah, I know. It's for all of you out there, it is part memoir, part spiritual journey, which I guess is sort of the same, but in a sense, Denise's spiritual journey started from probably a lower frequency place than most of us, I think would be safe to say. Do you want to take us through a little bit of that?
The reason I started this book the way I did is I wanted to get it all out. And we're talking about sexual abuse. There was a lot of that. There was a lot of domestic violence in the environment that I grew in. And I wanted to impact the reader by bringing in and talking about trauma. Trauma happens and it's terrible. By all means, it's terrible. So I started this book that way to really give you the full force of how my life started. That's where I came from. I came from the moment I entered, we can say the moment I was conceived into my mother, this destructive environment was there. And so it's a journey of how I found myself. And in the end, I had to write about the traumatic things that happened because that's part of the experience for me. That's what I set out for. Now, I'm not saying it's that way for everyone, but that was my experience. Like that was the hardcore way that I had to go to be able to come back into a place where I can love myself. And that's really what I write about in the story, is showing you that our souls pick really amazing adventures on this earth plane to work itself through. And I've worked with many different types of healers throughout my journey, my 20-year journey. Really started doing the spiritual work when I decided to get sober from methamphetamines and alcohol. And the moment that I made that decision was when my spiritual path began. And I look at spirituality as, getting to know yourself. That to me is the spiritual path, is understanding who you are throughout all of these horrific events that happened in my life. So the first 3 chapters of the book take you into the trauma. It takes you into the depths of, and the reality is there is a lot of this type of trauma going on in the world, and it's not talked about. It's still taboo. We can go into statistics that say more people have been sexually abused than they have not, but we're not talking about it. And I wanted to talk about it. And I talk about it pretty candidly, and I take you into the experience. detailed experience of it, to show you what I dug myself out of. And I wrote that book that particular way for myself. Like I had to see my own process of my life, because for a long time I couldn't see myself beyond that trauma. That's all I could see. And until I wrote this book, I really did not see the magnitude of what I'd actually dug myself out of.
Yeah, no, it's very apparent when you read the book. But there's more than just that trauma that happened to you in this life. You also came from a family with a legacy of child trafficking, and, you know, a family that is known for that in some circles. And that in and of itself is as another, even if that wasn't traumatically happening to you, it's something that, you know, we kind of weave through our generational healing as well.
Yes. I mean, when I was working with a shaman, at one point I realized that in one of our journeys, I remember seeing my lineage, and they were all chained together at the neck and at the hand, at the wrists and at the ankles. And that impression of what I saw said that my lineage was soulless, meaning when they had made a decision to be very self-destructive towards humanity in many different ways, through gambling, through sex, through pornography. And one of the things about the ending up in a child prostitution ring for me was none of this was ever spoken about in my family, on either my father's side of the family or my mother's side of the family. My mother's side of the family was very Southern Baptist, and their attitude towards my mother was that she made her bed and she should sleep in it. Mm-hmm. And so none of this was ever spoken about. So it was the big dark secret in our family. And when I got sober, I started to have flashbacks and memories of this stuff happening. And it took me a while to piece it together. And in the book, I'm pretty honest with you. I have a knowing that I ended up in a child prostitution ring. And the interesting thing is, how did I get out? And in that chapter, that's where spirit comes in. You know, we're always guided, and we sometimes make wrong turns, and spirit's always going to turn us around and put us on the right path. So somehow I got out of that, but the blockage in my memory was something I battled with a long time. Is this true? Is this not true? And there was just this overwhelming sense of knowing that it was true. And I finally wrote it down and I put it in this book because it is part of the story. And then I could see the deals that my lineage had made with this type of behavior and the trap that they were in. So part of my experience to experience that, unfortunately, was to free us all by me talking about it, by me writing about it, me processing what that means for women who are taken advantage of more than not in this type of way people make money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so. And it's so interesting. I remember when I wrote my fiction novels, some of those were the snippets, the very healing snippets of childhood, you know, remembered, but you realize when you're remembering them from like an 8-year-old's perspective. And it seems very, very funny, very like, what? Like you don't really know, like, is that true? Is it not true? Why am I laughing? That wasn't funny. Or, you know, because I remember my grandmother had this place underneath her house where we kept pool toys, and we were all scared half to death. Like, it was creepy, and it was, you know, but were there dead bodies in there? Well, by the time I got done writing, there were dead bodies in there. So it's just
right. And those things, you know, like you said, did I really remember it that way? I'm 56 years old now. Was it true? Was it not true? And what I had to go on was my sense of knowing and trust that, because that's really what as you keep getting into the book, you see, I trust my own sense of knowing, and it always guided me out of these really horrific experiences in my life, from not only the addiction, the addiction was like one day. It's time to get sober, Denise.
Yeah.
And how you can make a decision in that moment and never look back. And sobriety was one of those times. Leaving home at 11 years old to save myself. I mean, how does an 11-year-old make that kind of decision, right?
Mhm.
Unless you intuitively, it's survival. It's survival, and you intuitively know, I have to get out of here if I'm going to live. If I'm going to even be a high school graduate, I got to get out of here, right?
Right.
And then I was married for 17 years to a narcissist, and getting out of that marriage and knowing that it was time and leaving all that behind. And I think one of the things you're saying about, did I remember it the way that I really remembered it? And I don't think it really matters. In the depths of my being, I know it's true.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. But I just think sometimes when we look at as an adult, we're looking through child's eyes back through it, and it doesn't always appear. Our adult mind kind of tempers it a little bit, like, yeah, it wasn't that bad. Like, grow up, little Juliet.
Right.
So,
yeah.
So let's talk about that you mentioned in the book, your addiction, and you're very much like me. I just woke up one morning and I said, I'm done. And I never looked back. I never took another drink. I never did anything, which I think is really extraordinary. I think most people don't have that kind of will, that, spirit just takes over, and, you have a rough time, but the journey's there, and you understand that journey has to be taken. You have to start feeling those things again. But more about the addiction journey. That's always tough, being within it, because you're hiding things, but you don't know how to not hide them. So the drugs and the alcohol become that way of coping with them. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, that's exactly what addiction is. It's about the secret. It's always about covering up the secret. And it really, for me, in the end, what I saw, what I was more addicted to, was that feeling of shame and guilt.
Mm.
And if you've ever been addicted to anything, the high is super high. It takes you completely away from the shame and guilt. But that low takes you right back into the shame and guilt. Exactly what started the cycle of what you were actually trying to keep secret in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting sober for me, which was 22 years ago, and what a gift, right?
Yeah.
I mean, to be able to see. Now I can tell you, the first 2 years of coming off of alcohol and drugs, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, because every day it was a battle to use or to not to use, to drink, not to drink.
I never had that. I quit and I was done, but I know a lot of people do.
And I turned to, I went to Alcoholics Anonymous, and they're talking about God. And I thought, well, if I'm going to learn about God, I guess I should go back to church. So I went back to church. Well, that just created more shame and guilt for me.
Are you Catholic?
No, I was baptized Catholic, but raised a Southern Baptist. So
yeah, I was raised Baptist too.
So talk about, shame and guilt. But in the end, a lot of the shame and guilt that I was carrying wasn't even mine.
Right.
It was this family. And by nature, I'm a very happy, joyful, very loving, compassionate person. That's by nature, that's who I am. And I believe all of us by nature, that's who we truly are, is love and compassion and joy and happiness. And I think that I tried to express that growing up. Even as all of these horrific things were going on in my life, I was hanging on to my joy and happiness, and it threatened the other people in my environment.
Yes.
My mother wasn't happy, so if I was happy, she was going to make sure I was as miserable as she was. Now, this is all unconscious behavior, right? Mm-hmm. But each time she would physically or emotionally abuse me, she could push that shame and guilt back on me, and I would take it on. And everybody else in my home would go on their merry way and continue their behaviors while I was over here suffering from it. Shame and guilt, shame and guilt. So when I really look back at my addiction, it wasn't to the substance, it was to these feelings that I really had become identified as.
Yeah. And you bring up something so important here. When we deal with addiction, people look on the outside, from the outside looking in, say, all you have to do is stop. It's not that easy sometimes. And it's not that easy from the dynamic that it's not, there are people in your world a lot of times who don't want the status quo rocked. They don't want, there is an interaction, a dysfunctional interaction that happens in there. And I think once you break that, when you break the addiction, then you have a roadmap to break it in other areas of your life. When you see yourself getting caught in someone else's drama, you have the ability to say, no, that isn't good for me. So it's, people don't quite understand that sometimes there's a lot of drama around your change. That it makes it even harder because, now it's not just the substance that you're trying not to do every day. It's the people you're trying not to do every day.
That's a huge part. And that's a societal thing that's put on each and every one of us, that we're expected to behave X, Y, and Z. And so as we start to spiritually evolve, and we set not only personal boundaries, we set energetic boundaries with other individuals, people will try to pull you back into the dynamic that is normal for them. And I always say it this way, misery loves company. So if you're not with them, then who are you? And I know that in my book, I write about this push and pull between who I thought I was and who I was supposed to be, because there's a period of time where I was definitely unidentified, lost, couldn't perceive the truth of who I was because I kept believing the old stories, because I still had these people in my life.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it too is the self-awareness piece. There are times that like I'll get angry and I just have to sit back and say, well, wait a minute, why did this anger happen? Well, somebody violated my boundaries. Okay. But why did that, you have to take responsibility for that. And I think that's one thing that's really needs to be more prevalent in today's society is, we're asking other people around us to change, to make us feel better about ourselves. And it's just wild to watch, because in the end, we have to be aware enough to say, okay, you know what? Denise said something to me. It made me angry. Why did it make me angry? What did I need to heal? Because in the end, I've actually told people that thing, like, you know what, this anger isn't really mine, it's yours. So go figure it out. And I think we need to be doing more of that in our society today, compassionately.
I laugh while you're talking about this, because, I consider myself a pretty responsible person, to the point where I took on the responsibility of other people's emotions and feelings to make everything right. Right. And we're talking about taking responsibility. And as the more aware that I become, meaning I can observe myself in these relationships and really see from this higher perspective what part is for me. Even in that interaction, right? Even though it's evoking anger in me, I know my pattern with anger. Right. And so when that person shows up, it's showing me that the pattern within me is still there. It really has nothing to do about the interaction in that moment at all whatsoever.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
And what I have to be careful of is taking responsibility for both parties.
Right.
As an empathetic, super sensitive person who comes from a codependent environment, right? It's not my responsibility. Leave their emotions. That's for them, like you said. And sometimes people aren't ready to hear.
Right. They aren't.
And as an aware person, sometimes it seems pretty lonely.
Yeah, it can, but it's also a time to, I think, share with others and educate a little bit, because we have a family dynamic where there's someone who really irritates everyone in our family because he hasn't changed in 30 years. And, I constantly, when they're complaining about it, I have to remind them, well, you need to be grateful for your growth and just let that go. He'll grow when he's ready. And, they kind of look at me like, oh, I'd rather just bitch about it.
And we can fall into that trap to really go down that road and complain about that person. But that's not serving that person either.
Right.
And in what I write about in the book is I start to, in some of my spiritual awakening stories, I show you the threads of energy that were keeping me tied to these type of emotional stories that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And once you can see how we hold a particular perception of someone, and when we hold them in that perspective, just as someone else would hold us in a particular perspective, we're actually keeping them hostage to our story.
Oh, that's really nice. Yes.
And so even what you're just sharing about that one person in the family that irritates you, as long as we hold him in that light, he will always play that role.
Interesting.
As soon as you don't hold him in that perception and in that light, he's free to be who he truly is.
Right. That could be quite scary, actually.
Both of my parents are passed. My mother passed in 2020 and my father had passed in 2015. So I have one immediate family member left, which is my brother. And it's really interesting to watch the dynamic and the ties as I continue to evolve, and him coming to me wanting to play these certain roles.
Yes.
And me saying, I'm not going to play that anymore. You can't make me feel shame and guilt because I'm leaving the dynamic of this relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this rift in this space between us right now where I made my decision about the relationship. Now, whatever he decides, that's what the new relationship will be. But we're ending the dynamic of the old.
Right.
By this behavior of him coming to me in a narcissistic way, controlling me and trying to browbeat me in an old way that we engaged in as children. Right. And when I saw that, I went, oh, I know what's going on here and it's not going to work. Right. So I can not hold him in that perception anymore. Mm-hmm. As the wounded little boy who feels overshadowed by his sister.
Yeah, no, but the beauty of that though is, when you practice this, you'll find that the more you're able to do it, the better things come, because your expectations, I'm always surprised when I let go of that sort of perception and just say, okay, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And people step up. I mean, it's like, whoa, I didn't expect that. But once you change that dynamic, it's always kind of fun to watch, because I think part of that addict mentality is you want to manipulate. And once you're able to stop manipulating it, great things just zoom in.
Yes. I mean, when we step out of our own illusion of our own mind of how we perceive things should be, that's when we start to really have fun.
Yeah. And letting go of outcomes, just completely letting go of outcomes is it's amazing what shows up. So your book is coming out next week. We're in pre-sale right now. Tell us where we can find it and where we can find you if we want to. Well, you know what? Before we do that, let's talk about your energy paintings, because I think this is where people are going to want to find you. And I probably should have made a note. Where the book is coming out, but also there is a separate campaign right after about the energy paintings you do. So talk a little bit about those, because I know you see energy and you paint it.
Well, first of all, I didn't start painting until I started writing this book. And that spirit showing me my own journey. So you'll get to see a lot of my paintings in the journey that I went on through my paintings. So my story is of the past, but the paintings are of where I'm headed, what I'm moving through in the moment. And it's this relationship that I have with spirit. And one of the beautiful things that I've been gifted with is being able to merge my energy with others. And I write about this in the book, that the merging of my energy was a self-defense. I was using it as a way to understand who I was supposed to be in the world. Because remember, I disconnected from who I thought I was.
Right.
So this beautiful gift of being able to merge my energy has allowed me to be able to paint other people's soul energy. It's called soul energy portraits. And so I started doing this a couple of years ago, and I was doing it with pencil drawings where I never had met the person, and I would just close my eyes and I would start drawing the energy. And in that process, when I would open my eyes, I could read between the colors and the lines about where this person was at, who they really were. I could see them for who they were. And it was really fun to play this way. So then I love the feeling of paint on the canvas, taking a brush and just feeling it, the smoothness across the canvas. So I started using acrylic paints and painting other people's energy. And it tells a story. So part of what I'm doing with the book is offering for you to come and have your soul energy portrait done. And it's a way for us to get to know each other and bring a life to your energetic field so that you can see it like I see it.
Right. That is so cool. Okay, you guys. So when you pick up the book, Spirit Speaks, it's available on April 12th. Remember to touch base with her and inquire about those paintings, because you can see behind her, they're beautiful. There's actually one right up on the wall to the left, if you're on video right now, that is the cover of the book. I mean, the cover came out beautifully on it. So Denise, where can we find you if we want to find out more about the paintings and the programs?
You can find my online art gallery at deniseschaadart.com. And you can see all my paintings there. And there's also a link to soul energy portraits on there. You can find me at yourenergyawakening.com. That's my spiritual teaching website. There's a link there that will take you to the art website. You can also find me on Facebook under deniseschaadart.com. I'm on Instagram as deniseschaadart.com. And also as Your Energy Awakening, which is my spiritual teaching business.
Very good. Very good. And Schaad is spelled S-C-H-A-A-D, in case you're looking for, I'm sure there's lots of ways you could try to spell that. So S-C-H-A-A-D. Thank you so much for being on today, and good congratulations on your book.
Thank you for having me.